Hello again, and welcome back to Kingdom Tales with Father Lee. Together we're reading from The Tales of the Restoration by David and Karen Maines. Sometimes when we talk about Jesus, we imagine him, or at least I do sometimes, that he is sort of sitting on a throne looking very important, and he can sort of see out as far as he wants to all around, and maybe he's sort of looking down on us a little bit. He knows, what's been happening in our thoughts and in our hearts, our good choices and our bad choices. And there he sits as a king looking over everything that's around us. Do you ever think about Jesus that way? I do sometimes. And it's true that Jesus is the king. But it may be that he's not a king like that. Did you ever think that maybe Jesus is at work all around you right now? What would it look like if Jesus was cleaning a hallway somewhere? Or what if Jesus was planting in a garden outside? What if Jesus was answering phone calls or teaching in your school? What if Jesus is always just around the corner, and all that we have to do, you and me, is learn to recognize him when we see him? And maybe if we learn how to recognize Jesus all around us all the time, then maybe we can start to imagine what it looks like for you and I to do our work like Jesus is right there alongside of us. Today's story is called Taxi. Taxi! Amanda waved from the curbside, and the yellow cab with the checkerboard trim in which Little Child was training pulled to the curb. Hey, Elsie, Amanda called as she climbed into the back seat. How's your taxi lure coming? She pulled the door shut. Where to, bub? Watchgate entrance by the garbage dump. Little Child turned. Are you going to Great Park? Yep, I'm out of here and going home. Home to everything I miss, going to where the kingdom really works. Little Child knew that Amanda had never grown to love the city, no matter how many times she made crossing. Great Park was her heart's true home, and though he was glad she could return to the place she loved, he would miss her happy spirit, her true insight, and her pluck and courage. I'll miss you, he said aloud from the front seat. Oh, Amanda, by the way, I don't feel so much like Little Child any longer. What do you think about a new name? What do you think about Hunter? Amanda smiled, leaned forward, and punched him in the shoulder and replied, That's a great name. Hunter, it's you. Since hunting for lost children in Moiraxen, the conviction had grown more and more that being a hunter was what Little Child wanted to do, was happiest doing. But he and Hero both agreed that he couldn't do that job well until he knew every nook and cranny of the city. And what better way to learn the city than to become a Mercy Street Taxi Corps trainee? Little Child agreed with Hero and the chief cabbie that taxi training was the best way to learn street savvy. Then they could go anywhere in Bright City that he needed to go. When hunting in dark places, that knowledge would help keep him safe. But the truth was, not everyone could become a Mercy Street Taxi Corps cabbie. These were the driving elite. Oh, you could become a van driver or a truck driver or a motor scooter driver, but the cabbies in those little yellow taxis were the best trained drivers around. They could always get you where you wanted to go. First, a cabbie in training had to attend lectures by the chief about the past history of the resistance, showing how the old underground strategy now formed the basis for the present operation. Next, time was spent learning the operations in headquarters, the schemes of the city maps, the central dispatch board, and basic cab maintenance from mechanics in the Corps garage. Little Child studied the chronicles of sightings, past records of how the king had been sighted in Enchanted City when he returned from exile. Finally, weeks were devoted to cruising the streets with a training cabbie before going solo in trial tests on a motor scooter with a tracking clipboard strapped to the handlebar. Little Child, that is, Hunter, was at this stage in his training. All the streets, cul-de-sacs, turnarounds, and backways had to be learned by heart. Cabbies needed to memorize which safe places were in the 5 pendants, where Healing House was to be found, the names of the grandma vigilantes in one's assigned taxi district, the quickest shortcuts to use when traffic was busy, crowd control, how to dispatch radio commands, how to decode horn signals. Cabbies also had to learn emergency first aid, lost child emergency evacuation rules, and rescue maneuvers just in case of saboteur infiltration. All of this comprised the taxi lore, and Mercy Street Corps cabbies who passed their training tests were proud of the rigorous preparation that equipped them to drive a yellow taxi in the streets. "When do you think you'll be back?" Hunter asked Amanda. "Not sure," she replied. "All the play plazas are planted. You're learning taxi lore fast and going on your own lost child hunts without me. Tell you what, I'll make sure I'm back when you're awarded your Mercy Street Taxi Corps certification." Hunter groaned. That might never happen. He had doubts regarding his qualifications. The taxi came to a stop near Watchgate entrance. Eagerly, Amanda hopped out of the back seat. Hunter walked her to the gate, then climbed the ropes to the walkway to wave her off down the path. She only paused once in her homeward flight. "To the king!" she cried back to him, watching her jog away, then disappear into the garbage dump. He was filled with an aching longing for the beauty, safety, and peace of Great Park. He almost shouted, "Amanda, wait for me!" Though Bright City was under restoration, there were still many ugly places and many people who still did ugly things. Because the Enchanter's loyalists were always trying to breach the Ranger surround, the city was never really safe. Since the day of mudslinging, the boy had longed for Mercy's cottage, for the fire on her hearth, for her voice. He ached for Caretaker and his jolly wisdom and his jingling prance along the forest paths. He wanted to be in the dance of great celebration, protected by the sacred flames. He wanted to live again where no restoration was needed, where king's ways were always obeyed. He even missed tending the babies. "Hey, bub." It was the waiting cabbie. He tooted his horn softly. "Can't stay here all morning. We got a healing house to visit, remember?" "Coming," Hunter called back. One of the Mercy Street Taxi Corps' mission was to transport people ready to leave the healing houses back to their own homes. This would be the first time he had actually visited a healing house. But he was so lonely for the peaceful world that he had once known, so filled with home longing, that he gazed again for one short moment across the walls. He could vaguely see the green of Great Park in the hazy distance. In that welcoming place, all orphans belonged. There weren't packs of lost children roaming the streets, picking through garbage as there were here in the city. Why weren't more workers finding them? Why were they all so busy with restoration projects that they weren't going on hunts themselves? Hunter was down the rope and into the taxi. The healing house set back from the street in a walled garden. Immediately, Hunter felt it to be a place of peace and safety. It reminded him of the grounds around Mercy's cottage in Great Park. There, the flower beds and herb gardens were loved and tended. Here, he could see caregivers walking quietly beside those who were ill and healing, strengthening their weak steps, guiding them into patches of warm sunlight. Old people were pushed in care chairs along the smooth path by young, gentle helpers. The wounded sat on benches beneath the large sheltering trees. Lemonade? A caregiver apprentice, carrying tall, moisture-beaded glasses on a tray, took note of their arrival. Carefully, they each grabbed a tall glass, and the cabbie said to Hunter, "Wait here. I'll just go check and see about the transports order." 3 little children somber and sickly, sat together under a tree. Their arms were skinny, their legs thin. More neglected children, thought Hunter. Bright City was full of poor, neglected, and ill children such as these. How could there be so many of them? Hunter sat down beside them to wait for the cabbie. If only he could make them smile, just one little smile. Say, he said, do any of you like stories? I know a wonderful story about a king. None of the three answered. They hung their heads shyly and lowered their eyes, twisting their healing house gowns in their hands. Well, I like stories about the king, Hunter said to himself. I know a true story, a story about someone I know, a little girl who one day met a true king. And then he began to tell them the story of a girl named Dirty, a girl who loved living with pigs more than with people, and how she met the king in disguise, and how he invited her, filthy and naughty as she was, to dine with him. Come with me, the king had said. Be my special guest at the banquet table. As Hunter told the story, the day grew softer. The sun felt warm but not hot. The roses in the garden waved their rosy scent, and unhappiness seemed to vanish with the day's breeze. Hunter himself felt a little better. So, the pig girl left her pigs for the sake of the one she loved, and she became Cleone, the clean one, who had a tender place in her heart for all things ugly, because she knew a king could find something beautiful in every garbage heap. The end. The children had drawn closer to his side. One propped elbows on the teller's knee. One tucked a hand into his arm. The little girl lifted her eyes to smile and lisp, "That thur was a good story." Behind him, to his surprise, hands clapped a soft applause. "Very good tale," said a quiet voice. Hunter turned quickly to see a man who was wearing the white jacket of a healing house worker. Hunter knew that wonderful voice at once. It was like a mountain brook falling over a stony riverbed, like wind blowing through the tops of trees. The man's eyes were bright, his back tall and strong, his hair glinted gold in the sunlight. "Little ones," he said to the three children, "caregiver is looking for you. Noontime is high. Lunch for you all, and then rest and quiet." Grinning, he held out empty arms and then suddenly flipped upside down and started walking expertly on his hands. Silver-wrapped sweet treats fell from his pockets. The children laughed, scrambling in delight to gather the prizes. Hunter remembered that joy was always part of Kingsway's, perhaps the best medicine of all, and his own heart ached a little less to hear the sound of laughter. Flipping upright again, the man knelt to give the little ones a hug. They nestled in his arms, patted his face, pressed cheeks against his, and then walked carefully but obediently across the grass to Healing House, clutching the shiny gifts in their hands. Hunter felt as though he too had been comforted. "Do you work in the Healing House?" the boy asked. "Yes, when I can. I love to work with the healers. We do good things together." The man smiled, and the boy was grateful to notice that all the sadness he had seen on that angry day of mudslinging was now gone from his eyes. Just then, the cabbie bustled out the door and hurried to meet them, shouting as he walked, "Hey, kid, got 3 transports, 1 for front seat, 2 for the back, plus their stuff. Find something else to do this afternoon. No room." "You can spend the afternoon with me," replied the healer. "Sure thing. Thanks, mister." The cabbie was off, calling back over his shoulder to the trainee, "See you tomorrow for street trials, 10 a high sharp." "He didn't recognize you," said Hunter in surprise. The healer replied, "No, most people don't. But the ones who tell my stories seem to see me most. I hear you're becoming a hunter. I spend a lot of my time hunting lost children. You should see me frequently." A brown bird sang on a bough above their heads. They both looked up. The bird seemed to bob its head in greeting and turned its eyes sideways to see them. "Let's go have some lunch," said the healer. "The cook at this healing house is an artist. Then you'll finish your rounds with me. We can find Thespia and join the street players later this afternoon. Sound good?" A whole afternoon in the company of the king. Hunter was thrilled. Later, on their way to join the street players, they walked across the city together. Hunter heard all the plans for the restoration that the king was making. One day, Moiroxen would be a safe place, with sand piles for making castles and lots for stickball. All the lost children would be found and would tell stories themselves. Here there would be a band shell where music would gladden hearts in spring and summer. There would be an outdoor market. Here they were planning a common garden with a bicycle track around it. And the strange thing was, the more Hunter walked with the king, and the more the king talked about his plans, the more the boy could actually see what the king seemed to be seeing. Yes, here were sturdy houses being built. He could hear the sound of children playing, running to catch balls, and climbing on the equipment. He could actually see in his mind the bicycle races and the women and men gathering in outdoor markets with piles of fruit and containers of garden transplants. He could hear the music of the band and the band shell. He could imagine the gardens with everyone working in the soil, planting and hoeing and weeding and sharing the produce. The city really was Bright City. No longer sad-looking or dilapidated or dangerous. It was under restoration, with much to be done, certainly, but much better than it had seemed to the boy since the mudslinging riots. The king was near. The king had plans. The king could see the end of the restoration. Hunter heard the watch cry, "The kingdom comes!" And the sound of the repeated echo thrilled his heart once again. Yes, he reminded himself, the kingdom comes. Soon they arrived at Play Plaza 10. Beneath its newly planted trees, the players were practicing a new drama Thespia had just created. She called it The Street Sweeper. The players preferred to practice their street theater outside. All the actors were in the middle of reading the new script, and Thespia was sitting cross-legged on a park bench, scribbling and making rewrites. Her strawberry blonde hair lay in damp curls around her forehead. She was hot from the sunlight and the work. "No," she called, "that song doesn't work there. Players, turn to Act 1, Scene 3 at the top of the page. Cabby, read your line, and then let's put the Song of the Mudslingers here, okay? Places, taxi horns ready. Begin." She nodded and fluttered her fingers in greeting to Hunter and the king when they entered, but she was too busy directing to pause. At that moment, Hunter saw Hero enter the plaza at the other side. He too liked to end a busy day at the City Drama Center watching practices, or here in the play plazas, which were blooming with green gifts from Great Park. Perhaps it was because he was sitting beside the king and all things were clear, that Hunter saw the look Thespia gave to Hero when he entered. But for some reason, Hero seemed to be blind to her glance. "Wonderful! Wonderful!" Thespia cried after the players had finished their reading of Scene 3 and sung the Song of the Mudslingers. "Oh, it works so much better up front like this. How did you all like it?" She turned to face the king and Hunter and Hero, who was now standing behind their bench, and lifted her hands in inquiry. "So what do you think?" The three of them clapped roundly. Thespia bowed. The troupe bowed. The most beautiful player of all held her hand for the actors to stay, and they came and knelt before the king. "Oh, I hope you like this," I really hope you like it. I know it needs work. It's just beginning to come together, but I wrote it for you. I wrote it just for you." At that, the king took her hand and put his head back and laughed. "Oh, Thespia, only you could make an ugly incident like that into art. The song of the mudslingers. I love it." Delighted, relieved, thrilled at his pleasure, the young woman rose to her feet, stretched out her arms, and spun around to the players. "Do you hear him? He loves it." In return, they clapped for the king. "Now wait," Thespia said excitedly. "Just wait. If you don't have to rush off, I'll show you something else we're working on. But first, you have to get this picture. This is street theater to be formed right outside the play plaza. We'll blockade the intersections against traffic and enact the mob scenes. There'll be dance, there'll be song, there'll be pathos, there'll be taxi vanguards. This dance we're working on is called the Dance of the Push Brooms. Players, get your props. Please remember," she said to the king, pointing her finger at him and at Hero. "Please remember, we are still working on this." The dancers ran to grab push brooms, tied handkerchiefs in their hair, formed two lines facing each other, and they began. Push, push, swish, swish. Their brooms made a rhythm as they danced the steps in time. Push, push, swish, swish. They sang, "We are the street sweeps cleaners all. We push the push brooms standing tall." They swung around the broom handles, leapt from one side to another, grabbed them with their hands, and swept in rhythm. Push, swish, swish, push, step, step, they sang. "Mudslingers warning, come one day. You may be sweeping brooms our way." Push, push, swish, swish. At the end of the dance, the king stood to his feet and applauded. "Something good out of something bad. Hurrah! Hurrah for you, Thespia! Mud into art. A king's blessing on you." Hero cried, "Bravo! Bravo!" And Hunter realized that he was laughing and cheering, and that he hadn't laughed or cheered for a long time. The players were dismissed. They had worked hard enough for one afternoon. Suddenly, carillons began to chime. "Work's end, work's end, work's end." People all over the city were calling good day to one another, making plans to meet up tomorrow, and went away laughing and feeling satisfied that they had indeed done a good day's work. "Well, we'll all be eager to see the production, I'm sure," said the king. Then, with one arm, he grabbed Hero by the shoulder and pulled him to his side, and with the other arm grabbed Thespia by the shoulder and pulled her to his opposite side. "Little child, I mean, Hunter, and I are going to spend Day's End with each other. There are some more things I want to show him." The king strolled beside the entrance to the play plaza, talking confidentially to the two beside him. Hunter, still seated on the bench, could barely hear the words. "Special but difficult assignment. Wonder if you two'd consider. Something I only trust to a very few. Song studio." Watching the three of them, Hunter saw that his brother and Thespia were a handsome match. The truth was clear. She loved the city as much as he. She would no more leave it to live in Great Park than Amanda would leave Great Park to live in Bright City. Indeed, it was Thespia, and only she, who could ensure that Hero would be safe from the dangers of being a one only. Hunter knew that the king was sending them on a special assignment because he knew the ways of love and how hard it is to find it, and how some folk need help in the looking. The boy watched the king wave the two off and then return. "Ready?" the tall man called and winked. Together, they walked to the street. Hunter realized that all his home longing was gone. He was glad to be here, in this place, at this time, doing this work with these people. A day of walking in King's ways had helped him to see Bright City as it was meant to be. Standing curbside together, the king winked again. A good day's work, right? And then he lifted his hand and cried, "Taxi!"